wasting time, we are going to the session for Q&A with our patron. And I'm going to ask colleagues to remember what I said, that we edit our bios and just introduce ourselves, name and surname, and manage the preambles, okay? And I'm going to ask whoever has been selected from the Thought Leadership Program to share the question with us. Anybody?
Good afternoon. I'm Sizwe Sihle-Dlamini. The question actually is to the point you just landed around Africa becoming the victors of their own destiny. Now, we tend to have a very scary reality that the apartheid and previous Boers are busy preparing themselves for an imminent war of some sort. And they're arming themselves. There's a lot of documentaries we see that actually detail this a bit more. Question then being, in the spirit of the third cornerstone of effective leadership, what is the solution to then ensure that we are prepared this time around if anything had to happen?
Okay, African political economy. Thank you very much for keeping your preamble short. African political economy, any question from there? Okay, we'll quickly move. Africa and international trade. Okay, I'll quickly move. Excuse me, can you just maybe switch off that mic from there? Good governance in Africa.
Good afternoon. Our question is, apologies. Our question is for the President. When you agree to leave office, you live peacefully and with dignity. What do you think causes other leaders, when it's their turn to do so, to leave in a chaotic and divisional manner?
Can you please speak closer to the mic?
Okay, so the question is, when you agreed to leave office, you did so in a peaceful manner and did so with dignity. What do you think causes other leaders, when it's their turn to leave, to do so in a very chaotic and divisional manner?
Okay. African feminism and gender studies. My good second, are you African feminism and gender studies? African feminism and gender studies? Okay, we'll skip it. They remain mute. African feminism and gender studies? Prof, you probably know the question, maybe you can share it with us.
President, and even related to Kenya, that in African feminism, it doesn't have to be about women alone, but let's hear you and your questions.
We will definitely prioritize them. I from this podium here will try to prioritize female voices to cover the dog ate my homework situation. Colleagues from Good Governance in Africa? Simon?
Mr. President, given the challenges of poverty, unemployment and inequality in Africa, why do you think African countries are so slow in ratifying instruments that can guarantee the right to development for African citizens? I can mention the APRM, African Charter on Democracy, Elections and Government, and even the African Investment Bank. And what should we, the rest of African society, do, including civil society, to ensure that primarily African governments ratify these instruments, be domesticated and implemented at state level, and thus be held accountable for the realization of the development that African citizens seek? Thank you.
Public policy. Simo, can you just speak?
Regarding South Africa having so many policies ever since 1994. I just want to know from the former president, which public policy in your sphere of existence was most important to you and why?
Because of the situation I mentioned earlier, for this round I'm going to ask two female questions. I'm going to allow two ladies to ask questions. Any takers before we close this round? Okay, yourself and yourself. We'll start this way. There's a button with.
Oh, yes. I hold it. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much. Patron of the university, my question is related to or answer we still with the Institute for Gender Studies. My question is related to the rising femicide, that have been taking place in South Africa, particularly in the context of women, young, mid-age, being brutally killed in their domestic spaces and by people whom they love and they trust. I wanted to know that when you were in government, what kind of policies your administration kind of came up with when it comes to the scourge of domestic-based violence in South Africa, and how far did your administration go with that? And if you were to reflect during your time and up until to this time, what do you think has been done and what do you think needs to change? Because as women, we still do not feel safe in our taxis, in the public spaces, but mostly we don't feel safe in our bedrooms.
Yes, please.
I don't know, I hope I'm not going to be defending the president, but I think there was a time in this country when gender was taken very seriously. In every province, or I dare say in every department, there were people that were called gender-focal persons. Gender mainstreaming was a policy, even up to local government level. And we even, not we, but it got happening at schools where gender in the curriculum was being interrogated at that stage. So I think at that stage women felt very much important, and the topic of gender was very important. But later on it died. It died an unnatural death. I dare say unnatural. Because what is happening now in the schools is something that never used to happen during the president's time. And my question was exactly going to ask that. How do we revive this gender activism? Because even at the political space, you see that there is chaos. The people that would love to see themselves as leaders in the gender space don't really understand the whole politics of gender. It has become a chaotic topic. It is not even prioritized as such. What has become a gender issue in South Africa today is more an issue of gender equity. And gender equity, in my view, is a very important aspect of it. So I don't know how we can begin as a country, because I think at that stage, we're beginning to show a light in the continent in dealing with the issues of gender. Thank you.
Patron, I think this makes the first round. I don't know if you want to sit there and answer or come to the podium.
No, thanks a lot, Seppo. Maybe let's start with the last matter. The second last and the last issue that was raised about the rise in femicide in the country, and then the comments that have just been made on the matter of gender. You know, when we were in government, there was quite a discussion about a Ministry of Women's Affairs. I didn't agree with it. And the reason I didn't is because I thought that the best person to be a Minister of Women's Affairs would be the President. Not another minister. Because the challenge as I saw it was that ministers are equal. So you might have a Minister for Women's Affairs who must then talk to the Minister of Finance and say to the Minister of Finance, now Minister, please, can you make more allocations in terms of addressing these gender challenges? And the Minister of Finance would say, but who are you to come and talk to me about this? That the best thing to do would be that, as I was saying, that the Minister of Women's Affairs ought to be the President. Because it comes back to this matter that has been raised correctly, the issue of gender mainstream. Because you need to impact on the matter of gender across the board. And therefore, I'm just talking about government. And therefore, there is need to intervene on the gender question in terms of the entirety of the work that government does. And certainly, I don't know how government is organized now, but as it was organized then, certainly the office best placed to intervene on the matter of gender was the Office of the President. which is why we then said, all right, then there must be a minister in the president's office, not a minister of women's affairs, but a minister in the office of the president to assist the president. Is this thing on or off? There must be a minister in the office of the president to assist the president to attend to that matter. But of course that's changed. There is a minister of women's affairs. I don't know how it works. I haven't checked. But maybe it works. Maybe we were wrong. But it comes back to this matter you are raising about gender mainstreaming, because indeed that was the view that you needed to have a gender machinery throughout all the spheres of government. Because as I was saying, it's when you're attending to the matter of gender, it's not merely a matter of gender equity, for instance. Therefore, let's have 50% MPs, and then we've done our work on the gender issue. Sure, it's an important issue, but there are many other things that need to be done. So I think that we need to do, even to respond to the matter you are raising about femicide. I think certainly as government, we need to go back to that gender mainstream. 2 years ago or something, I had to address a meeting at the University of Venda on the gender question, including this issue of gender mainstreaming, and to look particularly at what happens at the universities with regard to this matter. If you looked at the universities, for instance, it was quite clear that in terms of the teaching staffs, the majority of your lecturers and so on, women, would be at the lower levels. If you looked at the professors, predominantly male, disproportionately male. And so when you look at the matter more closely, you'd find, for instance, that the universities were not taking, many of the universities, not addressing the matter that the women lecturers give birth to babies. The male ones don't. So when you say gender mainstreaming, just taking that matter, one element of that, one university in the US said, therefore there needs to be what they called a lactation room at the university. So that if there is a woman lecturer who's breastfeeding, they don't have to get into the car to drive home to do the breastfeeding. Because that is time that the university deducts that she's away there somewhere. That one way to address that is let's have a lactation room at the university so that the babies are brought there. So I'm just giving that as an example of the kind of thing that would be done if you say gender mainstreaming. So my response is that I think as a country, we need to go back to that. Because if we do that, then we can even come closer to understanding what is the reason for this terrible thing which is correctly referred to as a rising femicide. Honestly, I cannot answer that question. If you say to me why is it happening, I can't. But we need to understand it in order to be able to deal with it effectively. And I think that we would get there if we indeed mainstream the generation. Professor Meyiwa, I don't know about your university here. Are you mainstreaming gender? It's okay, you don't need to answer. But I think it's a critical matter. It's a critical matter. So one of the things I think we need to do, is to raise this matter with the governing party. All of us, individually or collectively, whatever, to come to the governing party to say, the point, for instance, has been made that in the past, you even had these gender machineries, even right down to local levels. They no longer exist. Which means practically, whatever lovely speeches are made, practically the matter is not being attended to properly. There is a mission I still have to carry out. I won't tell you who gave me the mission. Somebody who says here at UNISA that part of the challenge relating even to this matter of femicide is arises from wrong sentencing policies in terms of our judiciary. That the sentencing of crimes of violence against women may be one of the areas that needs to be addressed in order to communicate a message to society that this thing is wrong and unacceptable. So the mission I was given is to talk to the Chief Justice about that and arrange for a meeting between the Chief Justice and the person who gave me the mission. I have spoken to the Chief Justice about it. To say, Chief Justice, this is a mission I was given, and I think you need to meet this person so that you can then discuss this matter. She may be wrong or right, I don't know, but the Chief Justice has agreed. So we'll arrange that meeting so that practically we do indeed, if sentencing of the criminal offenses which relate to violence against women, if the sentencing policies are a contributing part, because that sentencing policy communicates a wrong message, that this thing is tolerated, then we need to obviously to change that. But certainly the Chief Justice agreed that no, sure, he would be quite ready to meet the person so they can engage the issue. So in any case, the point I'm making in the end is that let's come at this thing in a practical manner. To go certainly to the governing party to say to them, we would like a return to the proper mainstreaming of this generation with the necessary machinery and mechanisms to make sure it happens. And I would end by saying, also to say, the President of the Republic should not then walk away from this issue on the basis that there is a minister who's attending to it. So I think that would be an important response to this question that has been raised about the gender question. And now there's an issue, question was raised about, as I had it, the first question was about Afrikaners arming themselves. I've seen a little bit of this in the media. It happened. But I think what is clear here is that the objective, we set ourselves in the Constitution to build a non-racial society. That we are very far away, far from achieving that objective in many ways. When we came into government in '94, the general view, what we're trying to achieve was expressed, for instance, in this way, that our strategic task is to eradicate the legacy of colonialism and apartheid. Now, as you can see, it's very easy to say that, to eradicate the legacy of colonialism and apartheid. But I think the experience over the last 25 years has shown us that that's not so easy to achieve. The eradication of that legacy. So I was saying, for instance, the Constitution said we must build a non-racial society. Once in Cape Town, we went up to the mountains. It had to do with the program which was called Working for Water. It was to remove alien vegetation. So went up to the mountains there to do that. And then drove back into Cape Town. Yeah, I was with some people from the US. And as we were driving down, I was saying to them, if you look from where we are high up here, you can see a lot of Cape Town. You could actually tell who lived where. They're very, very visible. That is the white areas, these are the colored areas, these are the African areas, you could tell. Just looking at them. That's part of the legacy of colonialism and apartheid. And we have not moved very far in terms of its eradication. So we still have to answer this question. What is it that we need to do which we have not done in the past, which will accelerate that process towards the eradication of that legacy as it relates to racism? That's the objective institutional frame which still impacts on us. Then there's the subjective one, which is part of what people talk about a lot, which is all these racist statements that are made. And so people say, no, this is a demonstration of the persistence of racism. Yes, it's true. But that's the subjective element in racism, which we still have to deal with. It means there are still many people in our country who carry all manner of racist ideas about the hierarchy of society. That problem is still there. But I'm saying it's based on a more fundamental problem. The structural, institutional racism that we still experience in our country. Not just that somebody has got bad ideas. The perpetration of racial division in the country, and you see it right across the board. Whether it's in terms of who is skilled, unskilled people, who are the managers of this country, and all of that. So there is a lot of political work that needs to be done to deal with this matter of Afrikaners who are arming themselves. When we're negotiating, we we ran into some problems during the course of the negotiation program, talking particularly about the problem of, now this is the ANC talking to the National Party. And you'd find that in many instances, it would prove difficult to reach agreement about matters which to the ANC delegates looked very simple. But you spend a lot of time negotiating and there's no movement. So when we then discussed this matter, we said to ourselves, okay, now let's say we can't explain why there is resistance on these very simple matters. But let's put ourselves in the shoes of the people across the table. And when we did that, we said, you know, the problem with it is that here are these people, National Party, they've been in power for so many decades. But as part of the white population, they've been part of white minority domination for much longer. And they're afraid of the future. So when we sit here negotiating, in the end there must be elections, a democratic South Africa and so on. They are asking themselves the question, well, what's going to happen to us? Particularly in circumstances in which they build particular images, they have particular stereotypes of the people who are across the table talking to them. Once, earlier in the negotiations, when we're talking to some of the Afrikaner leaders, they say to us, you must explain what you mean in the Freedom Charter when you say the people shall govern. So we say, no, that's what it means. No. Really must explain what does this thing mean. In the end, they say, no, the reason we're asking you this question, because we know that organizations like yours, what they do, they offer to have democratic elections. And so you feel comfortable that indeed elections do take place. But those with the first and the last elections. So this thing of yours of saying the people shall govern, you mean the ANC shall govern? I'm saying that's informed by a particular stereotype. As a consequence of which, as I was saying earlier, they were afraid of the future. So that is where we then took a decision that the best way to handle this particular matter is to ease these compatriots of ours into a democratic South Africa. That's when we took the decision, therefore, that let's have a government of national unity. That came from us, it didn't come from them. We said, let's have a government of national unity. And you really mean it? You say, sure. You mean so we can be ministers? Yes. So, it was to ease them to address the fear that they had. Which I'm saying we came to that conclusion, just thinking among ourselves, that the reason very simple matters that were failing to resolve them is because of fear of the future. So what do we do to address that? I'm saying this to say there's a lot of political work that we need to do to deal with this consciousness, which is racism. The political work that needs to be done. So I don't know what the organizations like the ANC are doing, for instance. Because obviously, we're seeing those things like the Afrikaners arming themselves. An organization like the ANC must say to itself, why are they behaving like this? what is it that we must do to stop this? Apart from dealing with it as a matter of law and order, but there's also a more fundamental challenge we face to eradicate that thinking. And I must say that in that connection, there's something else we would also need to address, which is this phenomenon which first popped up here as 100% Zulu boy. Because then you see some other things. I've seen stickers which will say 150% better. And things like, I'm saying that phenomenon, we have to be careful about it. Because it's clear that some people are using the manner in which the government is organized, particularly with regard to the provinces, to try and cultivate a rebirth of tribalism among ourselves. So I'm saying apart from dealing with this issue of racism, and people taking up arms because of that, or insulting people and so on, we've also got this other element, which I think needs to be taken care of. Now, there are questions that are raised here about which concern the continent. What do we do about sustaining a passion for Africa? About leaders who depart in a chaotic manner, slow ratification of AU documents, etc. Now I have to be very careful how I phrase this. I think, well, let me put it this way. In many instances, when I go around the continent, the people say there was a particular period in our history, recent African history. It's around the time of the formation of the African Union, 2002. Just before, after, people would say that that period was a very inspiring period for all of us on the continent. Because there's a clear direction where we're going as a country. And then the political leadership on the continent changed. And that disappeared. So, I'm not saying that, I'm reporting what he said to me by other people. So, then it has various consequences. Some time back, well, let me say this, I think all of us know here that generally the African continent has been very unhappy about the functioning of the International Criminal Court. And the result of that, it was then decided to establish an African Court of Justice, which would have the same mandate as the International Criminal Court, like to try crimes of genocide, human rights, and all of those crimes. To have an African Court of Justice. So that the continent then uses the ICC properly as it should use it, as a court of last resort, not first resort. So the continent needs to establish its own courts of justice which will deal with the same crimes. Then if whatever happens needs to be going to referred to a court of final justice, then of course it can go to the ICC. Now so the matter was agreed, the protocol was worked on to establish the International Court of Justice. So protocol was done. That protocol must be at least 5-6 years old now. And yet the very same African countries which say we don't want to go to the ICC have not ratified that protocol. When last I looked at it 4 or 5 months ago, not a single African country, including South Africa, had ratified the protocol to establish an African Court of Justice, so that we as Africans can then try people who are committing genocide, and leave the court, the ICC, as that court of last resort. But nobody was ratified. When I've asked the question of people to say, no, but why are you not ratifying? People will say, we haven't ratified. I said, no, you haven't. I think part of the problem is maybe our leadership. Our leadership on the continent, in terms of trying to resolve the problems in each of our countries, pays less attention to resolving the continental problems. Maybe people get overwhelmed by the domestic, and so the urgency to solve the domestic thing. But when we talk about, but what about, as the question that was posed, the ratification of the African Union documents which have been approved, we get into a problem. Let me tell you a story before I leave this matter. Some years back, we passed through Libreville in Gabon. We were refueling. And the foreign minister, he came to the airport just to keep us company while we were refueling. And he told us a story that he convened, Gabon at the time was chairing the Central African community. So he says he called a meeting of ministers to come to Libreville to discuss the implementation of NEPA in the region. So he says they all came from the region. And then he opens the meeting to say, well, as you know, I've convened you so that we can look at as a region, what do we do in terms of the implementation of NEPA. So he says to me, and you know, then for 2 or 3 hours, my colleagues speak. And what they are saying is that really we don't understand. Yeah, sure, we know you send us letters to come in. But we don't understand this. What is this about? So he said, I allowed them to talk for 2 or 3 hours. And then I say to them, you know, all of your presidents were present at an OAU summit in Lusaka in 2001, where that summit decided on NEPA. All of your heads of state agreed. So he says the ministers were very surprised. You mean we? That's part, it illustrated a problem. That you get a delegation from wherever, which goes to an AU summit and sign off on a document, policy document that's been agreed. And then when they come back home, they don't report to anybody. So the institutions don't know what has been agreed at the continental level. I'm saying that's part of what's been happening, which has been resulting in this what has been raised about slow ratification of policy documents. It perhaps comes across as, again, a matter that was raised about a declining passion for Africa. I'm not sure that's the declining passion for Africa, but perhaps there is, as I'm saying, the leadership gets overwhelmed by domestic problems and pays less attention to these continental challenges. But there might also be a matter of consciousness. I'm sure all of us followed, for instance, the events that took place in central Johannesburg last week or something, about the traders and the police being chased away and all that. Clearly, everybody, all of us agree, that business of chasing away the police was wrong. That's a criminal offense, you can't do that. That thing was wrong. But we've got to ask ourselves a question. Because, as it was reported, I don't know whether this is true, that a lot of those traders are non-South African Africans. These are people who are very vulnerable. They know very well that the slightest mistake they make, they can get deported. So you would imagine, at least I would, that they would be very sensitive not to fall on the wrong side of the law. But they did. We must ask ourselves the question, why? Because what has happened in a very, very disturbing, the communications about that matter from our leadership have been very bad. Because they've actually sought to encourage xenophobia. I'm saying it's necessary to ask the question, why did those traders behave the way they did? And the police have helped us a bit in answering that question. Because you remember, they then arrested other police officers who they say, according to the reports, had got some of this material which is called counterfeit, and were reselling it back to the traders. Now, I suspect this is part of what's been happening for many years. So that even people I'm saying were vulnerable, in the end, they lose patience. And if you don't act on this matter on the basis of a proper understanding, then we are therefore allowing the wrong things to happen. Because I'm pretty certain that I'm saying the police have helped us by arresting these other people, police officers. And it may very well be that that phenomenon, which leads to the arrest of this thing, may very well be happening elsewhere in the country. And because we're not discussing it, therefore we're not attacking it. I'm saying therefore, you might also, with regard to that matter about passion for Africa, you might have a problem about consciousness, levels of political consciousness. We can't, and where I come from, the ANC. The ANC has never ever had an attitude against foreign Africans. Never. We've grown up in that Pan-Africanist attitude. And it's partly because there's something I say which I get into trouble about. You know, if you look at some of the old townships in Johannesburg, for instance, if you look at Alexander Township, for however old it is, has always had a mixed African population. People from Mozambique, people from Malawi, people from Zimbabwe, and so on. For decades, South Africans, they lived together. They didn't fight one another and chase one another and all of that. And I'm saying that some of us who grew up in the ANC come from that tradition. And so when you hear people say, no, our hospital system is collapsing because there are too many foreigners, it's not true. We fail to run the medical system, and because we fail so I'm saying that level of consciousness becomes important. It's in 2008, the National Executive Committee of the ANC decided that I should leave government as president. So I knew that it was coming. So I talked to the president of the ANC and said to him, you know, I know you people in going to this meeting. I know this is one of the things we're going to discuss. And this is going to be the outcome. And I said to him, I'm pretty sure that's what will happen. But I want to tell you that if you say so, I will leave. It's okay, you don't need to worry about it. I'm not going to resist it. So indeed, that's what happened. That's why we left in the manner that we did. Well, it's because you come from the ANC. That ANC from which you came from had no tradition of striving for positions. So to say, me, I'm going to fight to be president. No, you can't do that. It's undignified. Two years ago or something, one of the generals in the National Defense Force, he says to me, President, you owe us an explanation. So I say, about what? And he says, why did you leave government? So I say to him, you've answered the question. Your question answers the question. It's because I knew that you people were going to stand up and say, that's our commander-in-chief, you can't remove him. And we could not afford that. So I said, that's why I don't owe you. So the general agreed. I said, no, when you say the question, I owe you an explanation. is because I knew you people were on standby to say, once I say I'm not going, you would stand up and say, our commander-in-chief is not going, which would create an enormous crisis. So we couldn't do that. But that's a ANC. It's a result of our upbringing. Well, maybe these other political leaders of the continent live in a chaotic manner. It's because they have not grown up in the ANC. They have not had an ANC kind of experience. Because I think if the ANC remains what it has been historically, there are certain values which are important in the very nature of the ANC. So that it becomes possible for me, for instance, Professor Mayo, when I see some behavior, I can tell that this is not an ANC. Even if they're wearing an ANC t-shirt. Because it doesn't represent the value system of ANC. You can tell. So I'm saying that it's our own specific tradition and all that. And in other countries, maybe they don't have a similar history. So that when leaders have to leave, they refuse to leave. I think it's specific to particular circumstances. But I don't think it would happen here. Certainly not from people who are from the ANC. Except I've answered all the questions. Thanks.
Petron, I'm looking at the time, and I'm asking myself whether you have an appetite for 3 more questions. And I'm going to open them to the floor. And as promised, I'm going to have a bias. I'm going to have a bias, so I'm going to take a question from each section. I will ask you with wearing white, gentlemen in the yellow, and gentlemen in the red hoodie, in that order. Oh, no, I failed in my own bias, ne? I did not count. So I inadvertently chose 2 men. Wait. There's one lady.
Thank you.
And you'll follow her. You're waving at me, okay? You're the third. And I'm making grace to you, gentlemen with the red hoodie. I saw you. Gentlemen with the red hoodie. Colleagues, quick one. Remember, name and surname, no bios. Get to the point so that we are able to cover questions. Let's start. We thank you for your activism. There's somebody whose mic is on. Please, can we have all mics off except yourself, ma'am? Yeah, can continue. Sorry.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, His Excellency, former President. My name is independent researcher and consultant. Just 2 quick questions for the former president. And since the room is full of very, very young people, I'm not one of them, by the way. But anyway, how can we ensure, not just as a country, but as a continent, that we are ready and can fully participate in the 4th industrial revolution
revolution without going through what Europe went through and what China, for example, went through in their great leap forward. Where in 2019, we cannot surely duplicate what they did to be where they are. But are we ready as a continent? Are our leaders ready to take us forward to that and to ensure that the youth that is here today and that is coming can fully participate and benefit and reap the rewards of the Fourth Industrial Revolution? Secondly, Honorable President, we are looking forward to silencing the guns by 2020. Are we ready once again? Are we there as a continent to ensure that we silence the guns? Especially when you look at the fact that countries like the Sudan, Central African Republic, and Somalia are still at war, and some still have instability. And linked to that, how do we ensure a continued and more robust role for women in peacekeeping and peace building? Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Open Cabinet.
No. Young lady here.
Good afternoon, former President and everyone else who's here today. My name is Sibabali Sisman. A question that I have that maybe I need to do more research, the answers might be there. Are there certain structures or protocols that we can follow to dissolve certain organizations that are not doing what they should be doing? Namely, the ANC Women's League and the ANC Youth League. Because we do knock on their doors. We do have proposals. I mean, we go as far as getting some of their cell phone numbers and they are not answered. How is it that we can dissolve those structures so we can take over and they can actually meet the deliverables that they are promised? Because the only time that we are consulted was actually this year. Very conveniently, not very close to election, in order for us to, well, sway us in the direction of voting for a particular party. So how do we as ordinary members of the country try to dissolve some of these structures? Thank you.
Maybe use the mic next to you.
Thank you. My name is Mwakum Jeng and I've registered for public policy making and analysis for Africa's development. My question is the current form of democracy an answer to our problems as Africa? The reason why I'm asking this is because of our policy cycle of 5 years. The policies that we make is 5 years enough for us to be able to solve our problems. I give two scenarios, a scenario of Uganda under Museveni and then the example of Rwanda under President Paul Kagame. Someone who was born in the 90s, today has graduated. Those two are still in power. But if you look at the development in the two countries, are two different. Is it what you do while in office for how long? The number of years you are in office, or is it what you do while in office that matters? I would like the former president to assist with that.
Last question, gentlemen. Last question in this round. If the patron agrees, we will do that.
Thank you very much, the chairperson, whatever you call it, because you're not recognizing us yet. We are here first for mind. And we want to ask questions. Please,
You are noted and you are welcome. Please ask a question.
my question is very simple. Dear President, since the 25 years of democracy as we stand in here, mine is very simple to ask the question about within the institution regarding with the language policy. In the constitution itself, it stated, section 29, about the curriculum itself, that every citizen should have a right to pursue his, the knowledge in his own language. And number two is that the philosophy, African philosophy,
seems to be underrated as to succumb to the Western philosophy. It seems that the Western philosophy supersedes the African philosophy. But this is the kind of setup that we are sitting here to talk about that as a philosophy that should be enforced. And to be enforced in a way that it should be not in a high institution of learning, but it should be the fundamental basic of learning as to the African child. To be, for instance, the literature upon the Biko, upon Sankara, upon many African leaders. I think we should remove the veil of ignorance in terms of that. But why is it in 25 years of democracy, we're still complacent in terms of that? Is that the invisible psychology to suppress us as students, especially particular black students? I submit. Thank you, the President.
Thank you. Patron. Please switch off your mic.
Program director, no. You are very unfair. You are very unfair.
Thanks, man. Once again, as I was recognized based upon India on.
Sorry, who's speaking?
Here. You recognized me, but you passed. I was supposed to speak after that lady there. I just want to pose the question to the former president of this country. 80 seconds will be enough. Mr. President, in 1969, David Morogoro, in the National Democratic Revolution, the ANC identified the enemy of the revolution. And then said that no, the enemy of the revolution is monopoly capital. But today, can you give us a view? Since the captain of the industry, monopoly capital, has bought the ANC, what is your view, Mr. President, that the ANC has been auctioned to the captain of the industry? The fact that no, the captain of the industry can institute 400 million to buy a president, it means that in this country, there's not going to be a radical economic transformation, there's not going to be land expropriation without compensation. This is at the center why the captain of the industry have decided to institute 400 million to buy a president, the head of the state. That is the first question, Mr. President. I'm trying to be quick. The second question is that, Mr. Former President, what was your logic when you established the willing seller, willing buyer? You knew it correctly that no, our people didn't have the money to buy the land. Subsequent to that, we understand, Mr. President, that the willing buyer, willing seller is not the law, it's not contained in the Constitution. But what was your view, Mr. President? What was the logic there in terms of establishing the willing buyer, willing seller? Because today, as we speak, 35 white farmers are owning about 94% of the land. What was your logic there, Mr. President?
No. Please switch off that. No. Sorry. Colleagues, wait.
Our people have been speaking. Allow students to speak.
Wait. Let's allow the patron to answer. I don't want to create a situation where there's a question that is forgotten. So I think all of us can see that the president gives us answers in detail. Okay? It's not a drive-through type of response. Can we allow the president to, time allowing, answer the questions that have been asked, even additional ones, and then we'll take it from there. I think in his response, some of the questions that you may be wanting to ask will be answered. I think the important thing is that it's not for your voice to be heard only. Okay? Your voice may be heard by other people. Okay? Thank you, Ine. Are we okay? Yes. President Mbeki.
Thanks, sir. The question that I did not answer which policy was the most important and so on. I thought I dealt with this matter when I was saying that we generally said our strategic task is the eradication of the legacy of colonialism in apartheid. So you cannot say among the policies that were adopted to deal with that matter, which was the favorite policy. You can't. They are all favorite policies. But if you say, for instance, we've got to eradicate poverty, that surely must be a favorite policy. If you say we must eradicate inequality, that must be favorite policy. If you say we must deal successfully with the gender question, that would be favorite policy. So I don't think it is possible. It certainly never happened that one would say, sit back and say, among the policies that were adopted, which have got this strategic objective, which one do I like best? I think we've got to like all of them best. But the very important thing, of course, is to implement those policies. So that would be my response to that question. So there would not be one particular policy which takes precedence in that sense over others. The matter of the fourth industrial revolution, the Vice Chancellor of the University of Johannesburg, Professor Marwala, has written extensively on this matter. And I think all of us here would know he is, in fact, a leading international expert on this issue of the fourth industrial revolution. And one of the things that he says, with which I agree, is that it's important to make sure that in our university curricula, we include this matter of the fourth industrial revolution, so that the students who come out of the universities have got to be trained and prepared for these changes which will come about as a result of the impact of the fourth industrial revolution. So, in terms of the preparation, is raising the matter about preparation and preparedness in order to deal with these challenges. So I think that is correct. There's another point that's been raised, which is that that in a sense, well, we've got to start somewhere, but that in a sense is late. Because you need to intervene even at primary school. So that as young people grow up through the educational system, they are exposed to this particular matter because of the impact that the fourth industrial revolution will have on all elements of life. And so you want these young people, by the time they come to university, they've been exposed to this technology and are therefore better able to deal with it at that university level. So I'm not sure that there's a discussion I know that's taking place in the country, certainly led by the government, about this matter as to how it ought to be dealt with. And clearly, the educational element of it is very important, to make sure that all the necessary education takes place, particularly through our educational institutions. I don't know what the universities are saying about this. As I'm saying, Professor Marwala has been insisting that it needs to be part of the university curriculum. Specifically, what that curriculum would contain, I don't know. A few months back, I participated in a discussion on this matter with a lot of young engineers and young scientists who were discussing this issue. So then they asked me to speak on it. So I spoke, because I was there, I had to say something. And I said to them, look, actually, I don't know. I need to be educated by yourselves about this thing. If I say, let us teach this subject at universities, what does that mean? I would not be able to answer that question. So anyway, the outcome of that was that we then agreed that it was important that they who were already dealing with this matter should then sit down and prepare a curriculum on the Fourth Industrial Revolution. So that by the time I said to them, for instance, I'm Chancellor of UNISA, and UNISA has got a very big college which deals with teaching, the training of teachers. If I go there and say you must teach the Fourth Industrial Revolution, I must be able to say this is what I mean. So what's happened is that therefore they constituted themselves into a group and to work on the syllabus. It's about between 25, 30 people. And we're hoping that that would be ready by sometime in September, next month. Because I'm raising it like this because, again, this is a practical matter. The response to it must be practical. And so I hope there would come out something of a curriculum which we can then distribute, give it to the Minister of Higher Education, who then can interact with the universities. So that indeed the matter is dealt with at the universities. Our colleague from the EFF is correct. There's more work that needs to be done with regard to language. The positions that were taken with regard to language policy, I think, are correct. They remain correct to this day. And the challenge has been what is then done, for instance, to ensure the teaching, development, and so on, of the indigenous languages. Again, that's a very practical question. Because one of the things that has happened, people at university would have been more knowledgeable about this. Part of what's happened to our universities is that in a number of instances, the departments that have been teaching, particularly the African languages, have collapsed. Yes. And the reason they collapsed because there were no students. So you maintain a department with the professors and all that, but there's nobody who comes. So I'm saying, again, we need to discuss the issue. What is it that we need to do in order to ensure that that vision, in terms of language policy, importance of all our indigenous languages, right to express ourselves in those languages, in all of that, what is it that we do to make sure that it happens? And answer the question even, why is it that the institutions at universities which were set up to do that, why did they run out of students? How do we correct that? Many, many years ago, the University of the Western Cape called itself the home of the left. At that time, the Vice Chancellor was Professor Havel, Jakes Havel, the late Jakes Havel. And what was interesting about that was that when the university said we are the home of the left, one of the things that happened was that you then had developed truly a university community. The reduction, at least, of whatever distance might have existed between the administration and the students, to ensure that we as the university community can then define what it is that we mean when we say we're the University of the Left and do whatever is necessary. The reason I'm raising that is because the issues that are raised about African philosophy and African literature, I think we need to engage them as universities. The student command, for instance, here at UNISA, I would suggest that you get in touch, I don't know the structures here, to engage the structures here, whether it's the Senate or I don't know who, to raise these issues. To say, look, as this university, which says, the UNISA says, we are an African university. To say, therefore, in defining what that Africanness means, what we believe is the following. So that's what I would suggest, that you engage this matter with all of the questions that you are raising. And I think that in the process of doing that, we would engage very practically the questions that arise. To answer the question, why have these things not been done? If they've been tried, why have they failed? Because I think it's going to be only in the context of that kind of engagement that it becomes possible to solve these matters practically. So that's what I would suggest. Unfortunately, Professor Meiwa is here, she heard you, and she's listening to me also. So it must be possible to have an engagement of that kind. So that important matter like that, language policy, African philosophy, literature, those matters are then dealt with by the university in a concrete manner, because I think that's what would be required. The question whether 5 years is enough or whether it's years or policies which would determine what happens. Of course, 5 years are enough for an electoral period. The challenge is has been policies on the continent. What policies are in place and what is being done to implement them. When originally I would have left government here in 2009. That would have been the end of the second term. So in that context, many of my colleagues, heads of state on the continent, would ask me the question, when you leave government, what are you going to do? Which I had not thought about. But the general feeling was, the thing that was expressed was the following. You know very well that over the years, both the OAU and the AU have developed policies. I think one of our presenters, they did say, if you take any letter in the alphabet, you'd find that there is actually Africa policy on whatever. Therefore, the continent does not lack policies in terms of its vision about transformation. That the problem was implementation. And so these colleagues of mine would then say, therefore, your task when you leave government must be to help ensure that the continent develops a capacity to implement the policies that it has adopted. That's what led to the formation of TMALI. Therefore, that would need an institution like TMALI to train these thought leaders, these change makers, who must be familiar with all of these African policies and be able to intervene to bring about the change that we need. So I'm saying that the question about being whether an electoral period of 5 years is enough or not, I don't think that's a challenge. The challenge is, do we have the right policies? Have we developed the capacity to implement them? Are we implementing? Where, if there are differences between Uganda and then Rwanda, as was mentioned, it really would be because of different policies and what is being done in terms of implementation of those policies. So that's the direction in which I would look, not so much at the terms, 5 years or 7 years or whatever. The silencing the guns. And it is true, this decision was taken some time back that we should silence the guns by 2020. It's clear that that's not going to be achieved. But it gives us an opportunity to, again, to have a look at this matter, as I say, practically. There is a document which was prepared and was adopted by the AU in 2017, I think. It was relating to this matter of peace and security on the continent. And one of the observations that it made was that over the years, the continent had addressed this matter in a wrong way. Well, in a manner that was insufficient. In this sense, that the matter of silencing the guns, peacemaking on the continent, was viewed as, in a sense, as a security matter. And therefore, what you need to do when this conflict has broken out is intervene to negotiate a ceasefire, then put in peacekeeping forces, get an interim government in place, which prepares for elections, and then elections take place and the matter has been resolved. That this approach has not worked very well. That we, rather than look at this matter from a security point of view, let's address it from a political point of view. That what causes the conflict is a political problem. And therefore, it's not sufficient to say the guns have stopped firing. They are peacekeepers. There will be elections. Because it's not going to solve the problem. Unless you've addressed the issue, what is it that caused the conflict in the first place? So that's why I'm saying the document said, therefore, the continent needs to shift and address a political issue. Now you can imagine the challenge of that. If you take, for instance, Somalia, which has got Al-Shabaab, which says that it is related to these other jihadist organizations like Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State. If you say, in order to get peace in Somalia, let's not treat it just as a security matter, but as a political issue, then the question arises, should, for instance, the current government of Somalia, should it engage Al-Shabaab in negotiations? Immediately you run into problems. Or somebody says, should the government of Nigeria engage Boko Haram in negotiations? Somebody will say, no, but you can't be talking to terrorists. Which means, therefore, you are saying the matter can only be resolved by the force of arms, by use of arms. But I'm saying the fact of setting this date of the silence of guns by 2020 has given the continent an opportunity to reflect on what it has done with regard to this peace matter. What has worked, what's not worked, and why. The guns won't be silenced by 2020, but I think the continent by 2020 will be in a better position to address this matter more effectively, particularly if the continent then follows this route, which is the letting the politics lead rather than the matter of security to lead in resolving these issues. I see that among us we've got Derek Hanekom. Derek there is a member of the National Executive Committee of the ANC. And Derek, I'm sure you heard the question, which was, how do we access these leagues of the ANC, the Women's League, the Youth League? We try to reach out to them, but they can't find them. Because we've got ideas of what needs to be done and so on. Shall we delegate the task to you to deal with the matter? No, I think it's necessary to, I'm glad the question has been raised. I think what I can promise to do with regard to that is I can talk to the president of the ANC, Comrade Ramaphosa, about that, to say the matter was raised. It's an important question. What do we do about it? That I can promise to do. Derek has also promised to take it up. So I think that's the only way really we can, and I can answer this. Again, it's a practical matter. I don't think it's a matter about which we should philosophize. The phrase monopoly capital is, in terms of the economists here will know this, it's a scientific term. It arose because in the development of capitalism, you had a process during which you had, let us talk about somebody producing bottles. Many firms producing bottles. But over time, what happens in the capitalist system is that the bigger ones swallow up the smaller ones. Until you get to a situation where there are very few companies producing bottles, which means they then have a possibility to determine prices, for instance, of bottles. Whereas before, there were so many firms producing bottles, and none of them had any power to determine price. So the issue of monopoly capitalism arose to describe that situation when the market gets dominated by particularly few firms, such that they are then able to determine whatever it is that's relevant. It's a scientific term. I've known it as a scientific term, it's probably because I trained as an economist. So, when you say, therefore, what is the character of the South African economy? It's a capitalist economy. And then you ask the question, is it dominated by monopolies? It may very well be. Which monopolies? If you take the Anglo-American Corporation, Anglo in 1994, Anglo-American in 1994, and including its affiliated companies, accounted for 60%, 60% of the shares quoted on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. One company. Clearly, you can see that's a monopoly. What has happened since is that Anglo-American, the shares quoted, Anglo-American shares are quoted on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange are now 6%. From 60 to 6. So, looking at this question scientifically, you've got to say what has happened. If you take Investec, the bank, Investec, you got Investec South Africa, and you've then got Investec PLC, which is the one that is registered in London. The biggest shareholder in Investec London is the Government Employees Pension Fund. That's the biggest owner of Investec Bank. It's public pension, government pension. I'm mentioning these things to say, I'm perfectly happy to discuss monopoly capital as a scientist, not as a political slogan. Let's discuss it. Let's discuss it because you see there are many important questions. The President of the Republic says, he repeats a position which we've held for many years, which was the need to have a social contract. Government, business, trade unions, civil society, really to address the challenges facing South Africa. This is an old position of the movement. But we need to answer the question, are all of these in reality social partners? Or is it merely a wish? If you look at this matter, I would say let's look at this matter in a scientific manner. If you look at the debt to equity ratio in the banks, take for instance the Euro banks. A learned person said to me that if you take the Eurozone banks, the debt to equity ratio will be something like 20-1. If you take the US banks, the ratio will be 12-1. If you take the South African banks, the ratio is 2-1. What does that mean? He was saying to me what it shows is risk aversion on the part of the South African banks. They don't want to lend, which is why you would get a 2-1 debt to equity ratio, as opposed to 20-1 in the Eurozone. Now, I don't know whether that's true. I've never checked it. But this was an economist, very highly qualified and all that. In fact, a Nobel Prize winner in economics, who told me this, something that I would need to check. But if it is correct, I'm saying what? Seriously looking at the matter of doing something about this economy. And therefore must look at the monopoly capital issue. You would have to examine that issue. What is is this assertion correct about the risk aversion on part of the banks? Because if you have the risk aversion, then you are not going to achieve the levels of investment that the economy needs. If the banks are unwilling to lend money to me to build a factory. So let's come at this matter, I'm saying not as a political slogan. Because you talk about monopoly capital. If I say to you today, all right, let's take the clothing industry. And I say to you, can you tell me how does the monopoly capital express itself in the clothing industry? You might find it difficult to answer that question. But if we really want to bring about change, we have to answer that question. So Derek and myself and some others belong to the ANC. I'm quite certain that as members of the ANC, we would never allow a situation in which leaders of the ANC are bought by monopoly capital, that they cease to be our leaders. They become property of somebody else. If that happens, you should blame the rest of us. But I don't think we would allow that to happen. So it's not a particular fear that I have, that anybody has been bought by monopoly capital. The matter of the ANC has said itself in the past that it is concerned about the issue of money, the use of money within the ANC, particularly around elections. I'm sure you would remember, for instance, what was called a diagnostic report, which was done by the then Secretary General of the ANC, Gwede Mantashe. And among other issues, he raises this question. Branches that get bought and all of that. It's an issue that's been with the ANC for some time. So I'm sure that the ANC will deal with that issue. And I don't think I'm saying the ANC has identified it as a problem. The use of money, clearly, because it's got to be addressed. And there's statements have been made now to say that actually there's not been any policy on the thing which is correct, and therefore the matter must be attended to. So I'm saying that I don't imagine that members of the ANC would allow that their leaders must be run by some monopoly instead of by the membership of the organization. the last matter, the land question. I wish we had time to discuss that. Again, let's move away from the slogans to deal with the real question. I'm finishing that now. When we look at the land issue and say, what is the land issue? I say the greatest pressure on the question of the land for the African population is urban land. Is urban land. We have to attend to this matter. If it's necessary to expropriate without compensation, by all means, let's do that. But it's to address the urban land question. It's very urgent and very pressing. So let's discuss that. Then there's a rural land. Let me talk first of all about commercial, where the commercial farms are. I don't know how many of you here, no, not that they are farmers, would be willing to become farmers.
Mr. President, no.
Would be willing to become farmers.
Mr. President, no.
No, I'm not going to enter into a debate with
You are
you.
misleading us, Mr. President. Please, the question of you are misleading us. I'm sorry, Student Director.
Colleagues, let's wait.
Then Sepo is better close the meeting.
Yeah.
He wants the meeting closed. Let's stop it.
Here's the thing. You have a view, other people have views. Okay? Don't deprive all of us of hearing the patron's view. You understand? I think that's important. I think a culture where any university, the exchange of ideas and debate and discussion and all that. Somebody uses monopoly, there's no monopoly of truth and idea. I'm going to allow the patron to conclude and that the man will then take his entourage to the holding room.
Yes. I was saying that the rural land, there's a demand that there must be land expropriation without compensation. Then the matter goes on to say to give the land to our people. So I'm raising this question. I was saying, I don't know how many of us are willing here to become farmers. How intense is this demand? Because part of our experience here has been with regard to the land restitution process. That land restitution process communicates a particular message. Because in questions where the land, people have won the land claims. And so, okay, now you can have the land. In the majority of cases, people have opted to take money rather than the land. So it becomes important to understand why. Why is that? So that I'm saying, when we respond to the land question, it must not be through slogans. We're trying to resolve a problem. And in order to resolve the problem, we need to understand it properly so that we can then deal with it. There are more things that we can say about this, but the only point I'm making, as I was saying about monopoly capital, some people, they want to make slogans about these things. That's fine. That's their prerogative. But I'm saying in order to resolve the issues, the challenge we are facing, let us apply our minds, particularly here, the academics. To apply our minds, let's think and study the issue because we want a solution. And that solution is not going to come simply because we're shouting slogans. Well, thanks a lot, Tsepo.
Can you remain